fellow bookworms to Tibra's Den. My name is Whitney, and we just finished reading The Glass Dragon by Irene Radford. This is book 1 in the Dragus Nimbus series. I'm not sure how many books there are, but I definitely plan on continuing the series, so I'll definitely learn that because I absolutely love this book, and I'm really excited to talk about it. The overall premise is you have this kingdom, and there's dragons. It's kind of a self-contained kingdom, and so the borders are magic to keep outside influences out, and the dragons provide the magic for the borders and have ties to the royal family and the king. And so somebody has been, or the dragons are dying off essentially. And so you have Jailer who's sent on his journeyman quest, which he thinks it's a quest to get his master's cloak, but he ends up learning that something's going on, and he learns the deeper meaning and what he's trying to accomplish, and what his mentor essentially wants him to accomplish. And so it goes deeper than that. And he ends up meeting up with Brevlin, who is a witch woman who has ties to the last female dragon. So they kind of join forces and continue on the quest from there. But yeah, really super enjoyable. I'm going to go ahead and go into my CAWPILE rating system, and then I'll talk about the book more in depth. But if you're interested in learning about the CAWPILE rating system, you can go down into the description, and there's a link to the original creator's channel, so definitely check that out if you want to know more. But for characters, I gave the characters a 10. I really enjoyed the characters. I thought there was a lot of depth to them. You got a really good sense of who these characters were, and you were really invested in them. And so I really enjoyed them. Solid 10 for those. Atmosphere, I also gave a 10. I love the atmosphere of this book. There's almost a medieval vibe. Um, and then you have like the quest and the nature aspect and the magic aspect, like, and the way the magic was done. I absolutely love the atmosphere, and so a solid 10 there as well. Writing, I gave a 9. There was just a few parts that were a little confusing for me. One I think was supposed to be confusing, but then you had the end of the book which was confusing, and I'm not really sure what happened there, and so that dropped down the writing for me. And plot, I gave a 10 though. I thought the plot was really solid. It never wavered throughout the book. Like, there was a solid plot line and everything tied into it. And so I thought that was done really well. Intrigue, I also gave a 10. Like I said, I was really invested in these characters and the storyline and plot line and knowing what was going to happen, and everything like that. So that got a solid 10. Logic, I gave a 8. Again, there's just some parts where I was really confused, and especially the ending, the logic just kind of fell down for me. But I mean, that's still pretty high because the rest of the story was very solid. And then enjoyment, I gave a 9. And again, that probably would have been a 10, but just those few little issues just dropped it down slightly for me. So average rating was 9.42, which equals a star rating of 5 stars, which I completely agree with. I absolutely love this book, and I'm excited for more, so it was definitely a 5-star read for me. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit more in depth. I'm going to try to kind of keep it spoiler free and just talk about the things I liked and didn't like. And then I will go into more spoiler contact, or, content, not contact. So yeah, what I liked about this book was, like I said, the atmosphere was really well done. You had that quest aspect, and I thought the author did a really good job of layering. So it didn't get too intense right off the bat. It was kept pretty simple, and then you had the characters and the deeper quest meaning and deeper plot lines added on top as you went. And so it was really, really easy to follow, and it wasn't overwhelming right off the bat, which I completely appreciate. And I also like that, as far as having different character viewpoints and such, because it was easier for me to follow along, because I kind of got a solid grasp on one character before she added in another, which I appreciated. And same thing with the world. Like, you had a solid grasp of the world before everything kind of kept moving along and such. Um, and then I also just liked like the magical aspect. I liked how the dragons were done. There was a certain quality to them which I absolutely loved, and it just it gave me like little chills and such how the dragons were described. And it sounded so beautiful and awe-inspiring, and I liked how the dragons were presented in this book, and I liked how the magic was presented as well. There was a certain color aspect to it, which I absolutely loved, and then there was also this musical aspect, which I thought was really cool, and there was also like this certain nature aspect as well, especially with Brevlin and her connection to the animals and such. And even with the magic, like there's a certain natural aspect as well, which I thought was really, really cool and I really, really enjoyed. And I liked, again, just the building. So, it didn't just jump in to like there's a certain political aspect to everything that's going on, and it didn't just jump right into that. Like Jailer doesn't know what's going on, and so he's just starting simply on this quest, and it builds up to that, which again I thought it just made it more enjoyable for me, and I loved. There were certain things that I didn't like about the book. There's kind of this love triangle aspect, which initially I didn't like, and I'm still kind of not sure how I feel about it, but it did kind of make sense for the characters. So the more I kind of thought about it, the more I do appreciate why the author went that route and such. And I think it's just my own, like I'm a very monogamous type of person, and so I think it's just kind of my own preference and such. I kind of have to get over my own bias essentially. um and so that kind of threw me off a little bit, and also how some of the characters are treated. Again, it's not necessarily that it didn't make sense for the story or anything. It just I was mad for those characters. So Jailer kind of has a different type of magic than what is accepted. And so he's kind of looked down on by like his mentor. And then there's also this boy, and that's literally he doesn't have a name, so they call him Boy. Because he doesn't have a name, because everybody thought he was too stupid and didn't comprehend anything, and so he didn't deserve a name. And so I really, really didn't like that either. But again, it's not that I didn't like it as part of the story. It's just it made me mad for the characters themselves. But I will say the main character that kind of looked down on them was kind of the leader of the magical commune and head of the university and such, and kind of advisor to the king, and he kind of grows. You still see that, which I think was very realistic. Like you don't just change overnight. But he does have kind of a growth to him throughout the book, which I do appreciate, and I think he was kind of the character that had the most story arc overall. And then you also have Brevlin, who women aren't supposed to have magic. And so it takes Jailer a minute to kind of get over that, because he's like, women aren't supposed to have magic. And so there's kind of this superstition and such that goes along with that. And again, it makes sense for the story. So it's not that I didn't enjoy it as part of the story. It's just I was mad for Brevlin, which I guess is a good sign, of a well written book. Like you feel things for these characters. Um, I will say though, the ending kind of cuts off in a weird way, and I'm okay with cliffhangers. Don't get me wrong, and I know this is part of a series and there's gonna be more, but it almost cut off like in the middle of a scene and didn't finish out the scene, and it could have left it on a cliffhanger while finishing out the scene, and so that was a little bit frustrating for me as well. And I'm just like what happened here? And that's where the logic, like I was really confused by that, and so that's where the writing and the logic got dropped down, because I'm just like, I don't know what happened here. And it went really, really well and really, really smoothly, and then the writing just like cuts off, and I'm really confused about what happened. And then you have this epilogue, which you're still left confused because the scene didn't finish. And so you have this epilogue that doesn't really make sense because the scene didn't finish. So that was a little bit frustrating as well. But I mean, that's the very end of the book. And I think she was kind of trying to keep you in suspense for the next book. I'm not entirely sure. And then there's another part which I will get into once I get more into spoiler territory. That was a little confusing as well. But again, I think it was supposed to be confusing. So once I kind of figured that out, I was like, okay, I think that I was supposed to be confused at this part. And so I wasn't as upset about that. It's just mainly the ending that I was upset about. But overall, like I said, if you like dragons and you like fantasy and such, I think this is a great book. Or if you're trying to get more into fantasy, I think this is a great book because just only 350 pages, so it's not a very thick fantasy at all. And the way it's built is not super complex, which I love fantasy. Like, don't get me wrong, it's one of my favorite genres, but I think sometimes with the world building and such, it can get really, really complex, where that wasn't the case with this one. So, if you're trying to get into fantasy, I think this is a good one. And like I said, if you like fantasy and like dragons and such, this is a good one. And I absolutely love the way dragons were presented in this book. So let's go ahead and get more into spoiler territory. So if you don't want any spoilers, I'm still going to try to keep it generic as much as I can, but I am going to be spoiling a few things because I want to talk more about those. So if you don't want any spoilers, go ahead and jump off now, but let me know down in the comments if you are planning on reading this or if you have ever read the series, and let me know your thoughts on it. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into spoiler territory. I'm gonna go ahead and talk about some of the places I marked in here. Um, and so the first place I marked, it says Brevlin had always listened to animals. She'd been quite shocked as a small child to learn that others could not hear them. And I really like that because I think especially anybody that has neurodiversity or like people with synesthesia, which I read another book, Lost and Found, where one of the characters has synesthesia, and she talked about that, how she was shocked that people didn't experience the world in the same way that she did. And I really, really like that, especially because Brevlin was a female and she wasn't supposed to have that magic. It really played an impact in her life. So I like that line because we do, like, anybody who's neurodiverse probably has had that moment like, what do you mean like you don't experience this the way I do? And so yeah, you have Brevlin. Let's talk a little bit more about her. And she's one not supposed to have magic because women aren't, but there are still witch women in this world, but they're more like have kind of a certain capacity for healing, where Brevlin does truly have magic, and animals can communicate with her, and she's really more like an empath, and she feels the pain when people are suffering. She feels that, or animals are suffering. She feels that, and so she has this wolf, and he has to go hunt outside of her clearing because she can feel the death of the animals. And so he has to go hunt elsewhere, and that plays a big part in the story, and it comes up in the end, in a very, very big way. So, and then there's the superstition, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, that she faces because of her abilities, but at the same time, these villagers kind of need her to birth babies and heal and such, but they're also looking down on her, which is super frustrating. It's like, how can you utilize her but still be scared and not treat her well? And so I really like the character of Brevlin and everything she faces, and just that capacity for that empathy and such. And then you also have Jailer, who he his magic comes from a different source, and so he's really struggled. He's had to suppress his magic because it's not okay to come from that source. Those are considered rogue magicians, and which are evil, and he's not. And so he's really struggles because he's had to suppress this magic and try to do the communal version of magic, but he hasn't been able to fully do that. And then on his quest, he's having to embrace his magic, but he's suppressed it for so long that it kind of causes an issue. So his mentor is Bauman, I want to say is how you pronounce his name. And so the next line I'm going to read is Bauman is starting to figure out that something needs to be done there's just not enough access to the magic because the dragons gather the magic and the dragons are leaving or dying, and so there's just not enough magic, and he needs to learn more about what's going on. And at one point, Shayla does get captured. About halfway, she gets captured, and so that kind of starts another quest line. And when she gets captured, the king, Darcine, who's tied to her, goes into like a coma essentially. And Bauman, who's kind of looked down on Jailer and such, is now having to expand his horizons and be open to different ways of magic in order to save the kingdom. Well, there's these books, there's this area where when there was the big civil war like 300 years previous, um there was this area that kind of got damaged and then sealed off, and there's all these books that somebody saved. So all these books on like the rogue magic and such were supposed to be destroyed, but somebody saved a bunch of them. So he's going down there to find those, and he says, um so some the boy who doesn't have a name is saying someone hid these books to save them from the fire, and Bobbin goes, yes, they did. I don't know who. It could have been a rogue who hoped to come back someday. The records say many magicians thought the commune could not last. More likely it was one of our own who loved books for themselves rather than hating them because of their content. Bauman would have done the same thing. And I like that line because one, it's showing, that Bauman can have an open mind for all his faults. He can have an open mind. And two, it brings up that question. And I marked another spot too, which I think I'll go ahead and jump forward to read. And this is when the magicians kind of get too old, they go to like a monastery and such. And so that's where Jailer is, because he's trying to figure out a way that he can take on this rogue since his magic isn't strong enough because he hasn't embraced it. And so the elder is saying, there is a book in my quarters, a very old book that was forbidden 300 years ago. No book should be destroyed, so when I stumbled across it, I hid it rather than cast it into the fire. And it brings up the question, like, should books be destroyed if they have dangerous content? And I don't think they should, because bad people will always find a way to use that. Like, they're gonna find that knowledge and such, and they're always gonna find a way to use that. And so good people need to access that knowledge in order to combat that. And again, I love books, and I don't think any book should be destroyed no matter what's inside it. So and then the next thing I marked, so Bauman, like I said, kind of looks down on Jailer because his magic is different, and then Boy, who um, everybody thinks is stupid and can't comprehend anything. And so when all the magic goes because Sheila gets captured, he's finding students that have a certain capacity for the rogue type of magic, and Boy is one of them, and Boy actually does really, really well. Like, he's far advanced past any of his peers. And so he decides that Boy needs a name, and so he's asking him, what do you want your name to be? And then he's going, what name? This is why the boy was considered stupid. He was incapable of carrying on a conversation. And the boy responds, like, Bobbin thought that, and the boy responds, only when I'm concentrating on something else, he replied to Bobbin's thoughts. And it's like just because you see somebody one way does not mean they're stupid. And so, or that there's not something more to them. And I really just really liked the boy and how he had that comeback. I absolutely loved it. And it just made me think, like, autistic children who are nonverbal, or um other people who are nonverbal, people will think that, oh, because they can't talk, they're stupid, or they don't understand, they can't comprehend. And it's like, no, that's not the case. Like, they can comprehend a lot more than you think, and they can communicate in different ways. And so I really liked when the boy called him out. Like, I'm just concentrating on something else right now, and you're disrupting me. So I really liked that the boy called him out. And like I said, I like the growth of Bauman because you see that he's open to willing to learn and such. And he kind of comes to realize that Jailer's like the most powerful of them, and then he realizes this boy really there's more to him than what I thought. But he doesn't just okay turn a corner. Like it takes him time. And so you still see these slips where he's like there. He'd been working with this boy for a while, and then he sees that this boy does have more to him and an aptitude for the magic and decides to give him a name, but then he still goes back to, oh, this is why he's, considered stupid. He can't comprehend anything. And so I just like that you see that growth, but it's not too fast. It's not like a really fast character arc, which I really, really love. And then the next part I marked, so the wolf actually ends up being the prince. So that's kind of a spoiler, but it happens early on, and you figure it out way early on. And I kind of got frustrated because the author kept hinting at it, because Jailer and the prince were friends growing up, and Jailer would call him Roy, short for Royal. Well, the wolf kept doing things that were playful and kind of had this look in his eye. Well, it kind of got redundant at some point, and it was like, okay, like we get it, like that's the prince. Like, why can't Jailer figure it out? And then finally, Jailer does figure it out. Um, but it kind of got redundant. So anyway, there's kind of this love triangle that goes on between the prince and Jailer and Brevlin, and something happens. Jailer decides to use tambouti leaves, which are what the dragons eat, and what the rogue he want to say musician, but musician. I can't talk today. Anyway, magician. The rogue magician is using tambouti leaves, so Jailer decides to try, and he ends up like getting like separated from his body, and it's one of the most beautiful scenes. So he's like flying high, and Brevlin's upset because she was clinging to the thread of him. And like I said, the magic kind of uses color and music, and it's just absolutely beautiful. Oh, she ends up falling asleep and loses his thread, and so he's just gone. And so Darville, who's the prince, ends up comforting her, and they end up finding Jailer and kind of their intimacy high, and then Jailer ends up coming back to them, and they form this really close bond, and like their colors are kind of twined around each other, which I just thought was really, really beautiful. And so they're on this quest, right, to get to Shayla and save her, but also restore Darville to the kingdom, because without him there, you have Lord Krej, who is the cousin of Darville and the king, who's kind of taking over, which comes into play. And so they're on this quest. Well, they have to go through the village that Brevlin fleed. And so they kind of know about her magic because she has had it since a young age. Well, they also her husband died on their wedding night, and she killed him. And so there's that. Well, now Jailer and Darville are so intertwined with her, like they can see and feel what she's feeling, and so she kind of replays the scene for them, and they can feel that, and they're like, "You didn't kill him; he killed himself. We'll be fine. We need to go through this village to get to the kingdom." And so they go through this village. Well, of course, she gets you know, attacked essentially, because they don't think, they still think that she killed this husband of hers, and they don't trust her because she's a witch woman and everything like that. And so Jailer put in kind of an armor defense automatically without thinking about it while they're kind of in this fight, and he didn't think to extend it in order to protect his companions. And so he's like, and he was untouched. Guilt cramped his gut. His personal armor had protected him. It had risen so fast, so instinctively he was barely aware of its presence. He hadn't thought to extend it to her and Darville. His thoughts had only been to fight, and anger at the cruel superstition that moves strangers to attack an innocent woman. And I just really like that line because it kind of made me think, of like the Salem witch trials and such, and how people will, like, they'll just attack because of superstitions, or they believe one thing and they won't really look at the facts. And so I just really, really like that line, and it really tied, how they're connected. And then Jailer, like, it was instinctive, and he's blaming himself because he was just in the heat of the moment and he instinctively protected himself, but he didn't protect his companions, which are super important to them. And there's also a cat in this book, which I want to mention before we finish up, because the cat, you never really figure out what is up with this cat, and there's something special about her too, because when Jailer ends up, so when the rogue comes and steals Shayla, and that's the moment when Jailer ends up releasing Darville from his wolf form, the cat, there's kind of this moment where the cat transforms and such. And her eyes change from like human like back to cat like. And so there's something with her, and we never fully learn what is up with this cat. And so I'm hoping we'll address that in future series. But I just wanted to mention that. And then that's the other thing during the whole Shayla incident when he's capturing Shayla, and such. The rogue, you're trying to figure out who he is, and the characters are trying to figure out who he is, and it kind of goes back and forth, and so you're confused whether Krej, who's the cousin, is behind this, but you don't know if he's the rogue or not, if he's the one that has magic. And then you're pretty sure it is him just based on some of the things that like Revlin says and such, because she has ties to Krej. And so you're really confused, and it kind of keeps going back and forth. But I think it was meant to, because he has a glamour on. And so I think it was meant to be confusing, but it really, really confused me. And then you get to the end, and Darville comes because Krej is trying to kind of take over and such, and Bauman's trying to hold it, but without the prince, there's really nothing he can do. And Shayla's about to die, and so it all kind of comes to a head. Well, Darville's like, I'm here, cousin, so, like, I am here, because now Darcine has passed on. And so you have each of, like, you have the 12 providences, and so they're kind of going to their alliance. And then you also have the outer kingdom, who has sent ambassadors and such, because they're trying to form an alliance as well, and they want to marry Darville to their daughter. And that's when Lord Krej says, well, he's missing, and he's like, no, I'm not, I'm here. And the cat has ties to that kingdom. And so I'm really curious, like, what that tie is and such. And I'm just gonna be interested to see if what I'm kind of thinking is the tie. But obviously I'll have to wait until I can get the rest of the series and figure that out. But that's where things just kind of cut off. So you have each of the providences and like the magicians kind of forming, like, well, I'm behind Lord Krej, I'm behind Darville, and it just kind of cuts off. And at this point, Jailer has saved um Shayla, and she's mad. So Shayla can crown the next king essentially, but she's so angry, and she's like, she wants to kill Krej, who is the one who trapped her, and they can't outright accuse Krej of being the rogue magician, because unless they have solid proof, they can't, like, they have no standing. Like, they know it's him, and they know he's using magic in illegal ways, but they cannot call him out without actual proof. And so they're just trying, to get Darville in place and make Krej shoot his own foot essentially. And so he goes running in because he's like, not my dragon. And by that time she's released, and she wants to kill him, but because of Brevlin's ties to him and because of her empath nature, it will kill her. And so Shayla's like, as long as he's here and I cannot kill him, I'm leaving. But she never specifically states who it is, and she never states who the next who the next king will be. And so she just leaves. And so it went from the scene where people are giving their alliances to her leaving, and you're just kind of left hanging. But that scene never finished because it cut off. And so you're left, like, I think it was pretty even, but it was just very, very confusing. And that's where things kind of got dropped down to me because it was cut off. Like, it was cut off, and I'm very confused. And then it jumps to the epilogue where you have Lord Krej's viewpoint, and so you're left like, okay, so did Darville win? Like, I'm very, very confused at this point. And it's like she could have left it on a cliffhanger. Like, you still don't know what's gonna happen with Brevlin and Jailer and Darville either. He wants to marry Brevlin, but she cannot live in the city. Her empath nature, like, she cannot do that. And Jailer needs to heal because he used his whole lifetime of magic, and without magic he doesn't know who he is. And so it's really complex, and you would already have been left wanting more. And so I don't think it was necessary to cut off the scene the way that the author did, if that's what they were trying to go for, as far as kind of leaving you hanging and in suspense. And then the epilogue leaves you thinking, okay, so Darville won, but it never gives you that clear answer. And obviously, there's still going to be conflict there because it's not just over anyway. And so I was really frustrated with how the book ended because it just left you hanging. But I'm definitely ready to read the next book. It's going to be a little while. I know I've mentioned before, I'm kind of focusing on all the books I already have, but I am definitely planning at some point getting the rest of the series, depending on how long it is, at least the very next book, because I need to know more about what happened, and I need to know about that cat too. I'm really curious about the cat and what her role is as well, and what happens to these characters, because I'm very, very invested in them. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the book. Hopefully I didn't get too rambly, but yeah, I absolutely love this book. And whether you are new to fantasy or not, whether you really enjoy dragons and fantasy and such, I think this is a really great one. And I think it's simple enough that even if you're kind of new to fantasy and you get a little bit overwhelmed by fantasy, you can certainly enjoy this. So I hope you will check it out if it's something you think you'd be interested in. And I'm going to go ahead and leave you guys here. Happy reading, everyone. Bye.